Good morning, everyone. A student once asked Zen master Hakuin, "What happens after we die?" The Zen master replied, "I don't know." "But you're the master," exclaimed the student. "Yes," said the master, "but I'm not a dead one." So what happens after death, of course, is a mystery. We're not dead yet. But the certainty that we will die is perhaps one of the most certain things we can say about this human existence. One of the most unavoidable of all facts. Anything and everything that is born must ultimately and inevitably die. On the other hand, listen to what some of the mystics say. In the Gospel of Thomas, we read, one of the disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." And Jesus said, "Have you already discovered the beginning, so that now you inquire about the end? For where the beginning is, there shall be the end. Blessed is the one who shall stand at the beginning, and they shall know the end, and they shall not taste death." This is a little reminiscent of that famous Zen koan, what does your original face look like before your parents were born? And in the Upanishads we read, when Brahman is known, birth and death come to an end. Having realized Atman, one is freed from the jaws of death. And the Tibetan Bokar Rinpoche says, what is suffering? What is death? In reality, they do not have any existence. They appear within the framework of manifestations produced by the mind, wrapped up in an illusion, just as they appear in a dream. In the emptiness of mind, there is no death. No one dies. There is no suffering and no fear. So on the one hand, we have this certainty of death. On the other hand, we have these mystics saying there is no death. Somehow we can be freed from the jaws of death, not taste death, and so on. So how do we square this with the fact that we see death all around us? Well, to understand this and how to square these different observations we have of the world around us and these teachings of the mystics, we'll start with looking at death from just an ordinary human perspective, and then we'll kind of dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and hopefully we'll end up somewhere where we can maybe understand what these mystics are saying. So, as children, I think most of us didn't probably think about death too much. We're really too busy living. We're in the moment, got our whole lives ahead of us. We're most likely, at least the way I remember it, too busy with the challenge of learning how to live than worrying about some abstract, distant idea of death. So we just kind of ignore that. That's not something we really have to worry about now. We have better things to do. We do, though, have challenges with the death and impermanence of other things around us. Of course, the toy gets taken away from us. We have these attachments to our parents, to our friends, to pets. Yes, we can lose pets. And this, of course, can cause suffering, anxiety, sadness, all those things when these things we're attached to ultimately get separated from us because of impermanence. These losses usually make us realize eventually the fact that we, like these other things around us that may die or get destroyed, our own body will, like those, get destroyed or die as well. And this, of course, can be quite a shock when we first realize it. It might happen several times. I don't know about your lives. Maybe you remember the first time when it kind of really hit you. Oh my God. I remember I was maybe 20 or so. I was coming down these steps in the house where I was living, and I took this one step, and suddenly, boom, it was like this big shock and panic and fear and all sorts of things. And so it's usually something we remember. Pretty intense experience. It could be something that shakes us up for a while, but typically, if we're young, we get on with our lives and we can forget about it. We get busy with our studies, our career, our family, this and that, and it kind of gets pushed off to the periphery. So it can be short-lived. We get distracted from it. We get busy with our lives. Although it can, come back and haunt us from time to time, and that can make us quite uncomfortable. Might cause us to push it away, try and do things to distract ourselves from it, because that's not a pleasant feeling we want to have. So we might go skydiving, rock climbing, go engage in all these activities to make us feel alive, and kind of overwhelm that fear that we won't be alive one day. Another thing we sometimes do as adults is we engage in what has sometimes been called a reality project, something to make us feel more real. We build up our career, we form these big goals in life. We want to build up our wealth, become famous, have lots of status, and we get engaged and really engrossed in these projects to make something of ourselves and feel important and build up that sense of self so that we can push away and deny this fear that one day it will be gone. But sooner or later, that's not going to work anymore. Whether it be sooner or later, ultimately, those projects will crumble in the face of something like a terminal illness, for example. We suddenly find ourselves, whether it's a disease or an accident or what have you, laying in the ICU, wondering if we'll make it, or maybe it's a slowly progressing disease like cancer or something. And all those attempts to get wealthy or feel ourselves as important, all of that doesn't work anymore so well. So we're back to the beginning where we're suddenly struck with this realization of death that we tried to get away from a lot of our lives, and it comes back to face us in a way that we can no longer deny. And we might have lots of fear, we might have anger, we might lash out at God or other people or circumstances. Could descend into depression, resignation, a sense of helplessness. All sorts of emotions can arise. And eventually, we might, though, recognize the futility of resisting this and trying to ignore it, avoid it, distract ourselves from it, deny it. And that's when we can start learning to accept it. And this is a process where we look at these habits of trying to avoid it and try and let those go and cultivate what we consider a more mature and realistic attitude towards death that accepts this impermanence and tries to counteract this tendency to resist it and struggle against it. And the more we do this, more we might discover that it's actually a great blessing and a relief. Oh, I don't have to fight against this anymore. I think I remember Todd once relating when our good friend Bonnie, a practitioner at the center many years ago, she was diagnosed, I think it was liver cancer, and it went quite quickly over the course of a few weeks. And at one point, I think she said, I don't have to worry about anything anymore. It was such a relief. She had finally accepted this. No more resistance. So it can open us up to an appreciation of life, a joy, a freedom. And also facing death can connect us with other people. After all, everyone's going to have to face this themselves. And so we're more in tune with this reality that all other people are going to have to face and all other creatures. So we're, you might say, living more in harmony with the natural rhythm of life and death at that point. So there are practices that can support this, like sit down every day, and maybe not every day, but periodically, and reflect on the fact that the people you love are going to die. Sit with the feelings of that and gratitude for their lives, for the fact that they were alive, and the beauty of that relationship we've had with them. The impermanence of it makes it all the more precious, just like a blooming flower. The rhododendrons recently bloomed in my backyard, and now they're starting to wither away, but they were so beautiful a week ago. They're drying up and getting a little brown now. We can also take some concrete actions to help us accept death, like you can take some of the things that you've been holding on to all your life and start giving them away. My mother's been giving some things to her children lately, and she's getting close to 90. We can write a will. We can make peace with our past. Take these kind of concrete actions to help us make peace with our death and to face it. We can also regularly reflect on our own lives and the fact that death is inevitable, cultivate gratitude for our own lives, and even go through, there are meditations where you visualize your own body, the dissolution of your own body in the process of death. The cessation of your bodily functions, the dropping away of your faculties. So if we turn into it and face death, it can do much more than just awaken us to the appreciation of life and help allay maybe some of the fear of it. It can also start us on a spiritual path. And a dramatic example of this is the story of Ramana Maharshi. As a young boy, I think in his early teens or something, he came home from school, I think one day, and he suddenly realized that he was going to die. And instead of turning away from that, he went into it. And I think he laid down and he pretended like his body was in rigor mortis and all of this. And he imagined everything. And he was filled with fear. It wasn't like there wasn't any fear, but he was filled with this fear. And this, I think he said, this fear drove him inwards. And he imagined everything dropping away, and that led to a realization. And we also have the example of the Buddha. He started off life being protected by his parents from old age, sickness, and death, all these things that we don't want to look at. And then he started to discover these as he grew older, even though his parents were trying to keep him sheltered from that. He saw, a corpse going by, and he asked about it. And anyway, he eventually realized that death was this inevitable thing that all of us would have to face, and it struck him as something so important that he decided to renounce his inheritance as a prince and go off on a spiritual path, be a renunciate, and seek the answers to this mystery. And so that led him on a spiritual path, which of course ultimately led to enlightenment. And one of the first, most fundamental teachings in these spiritual traditions, as we start to learn them, is the teaching of impermanence. And death is just one instance of this general universal law of impermanence. Everything comes and goes. Everything that is born ultimately dies. And contemplating this truth helps us detach from our attachments to these things. It helps us see the clinging and let go of it, surrender that. And so contemplation of this impermanence helps us accept our own death, because we're part of this universal law. We're not some unusual exception to this. Black Elk says, "It's good to have a reminder of death before us, for it helps us to understand the impermanence of life on this earth, and this understanding may aid us in preparing for our own death." So, death, of course, is not unique to you. Your parents will die or have already died. Your brothers and sisters may have or will ultimately die. Your friends, your enemies, people in the past, of course, have already died, and every person who is born in the future, your children, ultimately will die. Every animal will die, every plant, every insect that has ever lived. It's inevitable for every creature that is ever born. So it can be helpful just to imagine your life in the context of this grand arising and passing away of all creatures. And not only do individual lives come and go, but whole species come and go. So over the course of millions of years, there's what's called the background extinction rate, where species just normally go extinct as other species arise, new species through speciation emerge. And so there's this natural dying off of old species and emergence of new ones. And then over the course of maybe, the past 500 billion years or so, there have been these major extinction events. These where in a short period of time, like more than 3/4 of all species have gone extinct from whether it's an asteroid or some other major event. Lots of species are like quickly wiped out. But then eventually, new species emerge from that, as mammals did after the dinosaurs died off, and here we are. And at present, we're at the beginning of a sixth major extinction event. This one brought on by the actions of the human species. And like many of the others, we expect that this will probably result in lots of entire species going extinct. But that won't be the end of life on Earth, of course. After some people estimate maybe in about 10 million years, species will emerge again and the biodiversity will have recovered. So we can also imagine our lives and really humanity as a whole in this much, much broader context of entire species arising and passing away. This natural thing that happens. And expanding our vision even more, not only do life forms and species come and go, but mountains, mountain chains, rivers, valleys, continents shift and move around and emerge and drop away. I don't know if you've ever seen this huge crater in Arizona. It's this famous Arizona meteor crater. It's a little tourist center there, and somehow the crater just missed it. It was anyway. In about a million years, that will have all eroded. Big crater won't be there anymore. In about 2 million years, the Grand Canyon will be just a big, broad valley. The Appalachian Mountains in the eastern United States, about 300 million years ago, they were as big and majestic as the Himalayas. And now they're, just, I wouldn't say rolling hills, but smaller, much, much smaller mountains. And I don't know, give it another 50 million years and they'll probably be eroded away completely, as well as the Canadian Rockies. In about 80 million years, the Hawaiian Islands will have eroded and be submerged under the ocean. New islands will have popped up. So on these geological timescales, these things that we consider to be very permanent, mountains and rocks and rivers and valleys, they come and go as well. So we can imagine our lives in that context. And then expanding our vision even more, in about 600 million years or so, the process of nuclear fusion in the center of the sun is going to change as the hydrogen fuel depletes. And it will actually cause the luminosity of the sun to increase quite a bit. And that increased luminosity and energy from the sun hitting the earth will cause photosynthesis to fail. And of course, plankton and plants get their energy through photosynthesis, and so a lot of plants will die, a lot of animals will die. In about 1 billion years, as that continues and the sun grows brighter and brighter, multicellular life forms just won't be able to exist at all anymore. The temperature on the surface of the Earth will continue to rise until the oceans evaporate, and even little bacteria won't be able to survive anymore. By about 4 billion years from now, the temperature on the surface of the Earth will be a toasty 2,000 degrees. Surface rocks will just melt. Diamonds will evaporate. Anyone who told you diamonds are forever? They're not. And then by 8 billion years, and we're talking now like a quarter of the lifetime of the universe so far, another 8 billion years, the sun, as it increases in luminosity, it also is growing. And by this time, in about 8 billion years, it'll be a red giant, and it'll swell up so much that it will be almost or perhaps engulfing the orbit of the Earth. And as it does this, the drag on the moon orbiting the Earth will cause the moon to come down and smash into the Earth. That, of course, isn't going to result in much fun. Of course, everything will be dead by then anyway. So there will be this molten blob then after that, and then the whole thing will spiral in and ultimately end up in the center of the sun. And the sun, after burning all of its fuel, will become a white dwarf, which is just kind of the hot cremated remains of the formerly living sun. And it'll eventually, gradually cool off. So even the Earth itself is impermanent, and the sun itself. And the whole universe. In about 100 billion years, the expansion of the universe, which is accelerating according to our latest models, it will cause all the galaxies except for the nearest ones to accelerate so far away that we won't even be able to see them anymore. They'll go past what's called the cosmic horizon and outside of our observable universe. So there'll just be a few other galaxies we can see, and the rest of the sky will be dark. And then in about 100 trillion years, that's 1,000 times more. This is extrapolating quite a bit. Based on our current models, all the stars will eventually have depleted all their fuel, and the nuclear reactions, the fusion inside of them will die down, and they'll either become white dwarfs like our sun, or they'll become neutron stars or black holes. And black holes will eventually evaporate according to Hawking radiation, all of this. Anyway, everything will ultimately just cool off and die down, and the whole universe will be in thermodynamic equilibrium. And they call this the heat death of the universe. Heat death because there's no longer any heat being transferred from one place to another. Like right now, life exists on Earth because there's heat in the sun and it's spreading out into space. And it's this dynamic process which allows life to happen. But then everything will be equalized everywhere. So there won't even be any real physical processes happening. So the universe as a whole is impermanent. So just contemplate your life in this context. Just a tiny little blink in eternity. So this teaching of impermanence, it hints at a deeper truth about things, which is interdependence. Things are impermanent because they're depending on other things. And so when the other things are changing, it causes things that depend on them to change. And so this is a deeper underlying truth of how things are that's related to this impermanence and death of things. And so this is another one of the things that we will learn on a spiritual path as we take this teaching of impermanence and try and penetrate deeper into it. Tibetan Buddhist Geshe Rabten says, every phenomena is dependent for its existence upon a whole multitude of conditioning factors. There is nothing to be found that lacks such a dependent existence. So let's just consider some examples of that. It's fine to read these kind of abstract teachings like this, but you really get a feel for it, and it can get into your bones if you start thinking of actual examples. Where actually is this? Where can I find this in my experience, in my life? So let's just run through some of the ways that we find this dependence and interdependence in the world and our lives. Well, first of all, there's social and economic interdependence in our lives. We depend on others for just about everything. And if they are changed or stopped, that is going to affect us. So others, for the most part, unless you're a farmer, other people grow your food. They transport it, they process it, they sell it. Sometimes they'll prepare it for us. They'll serve it to us. Others build our homes, build our cars, build all these things we use. Others build and maintain the roads we drive on, the utilities, water, electricity, all that infrastructure. Communication networks, telephones, internet. Thank you to all the people who make this possible. The Zoom, build these computers, mine the minerals that are used to build all these products. Other people provide us with education, they provide us with health care, all kinds of services like this. Or if we're providing services, others buy them from us and we depend on them. If you think about it, it's easy to think of ourselves as these islands, right? But everywhere you go, there's this interdependence. We just need to look to see it. And this can sometimes result in anxiety because of this dependence on so many other things. Other people do things and then, well, we're not in control anymore, right? We don't have the security that we like to have. And so that can be threatening. And that's one aspect of it. But the other is this is an opportunity for gratitude to all of these other people that we're connected with in this very intimate way. And speaking of intimacy, there are even more intimate ways that we're interconnected with everything around us. We are alive because we consume food. And often that's either animals that have died that we're consuming the flesh of, or plants that we've harvested that we're consuming. And those plants and animals have fed on other, whether it's feeding off the sun in the case of plants, or animals that have fed off other animals that have eaten plants. So this food chain is interdependence, dependence of one creature on the other. And there's also these cycles, the water cycles, the oxygen cycles. The water cycles through the oceans and the clouds and the rain and the rivers and cycles around. And we depend on that. Of course, we depend on water for our agriculture, for drinking, et cetera, et cetera. And the oxygen we're breathing comes from the plants and the plankton generating the oxygen from the sunlight and carbon dioxide. So we're all intimately interconnected in this way with all other beings and creatures. And even our very physical existence, irrespective of the food and the water, the very fact that our body is holding itself together right now depends on the pressure of the atmosphere, for example. If we were out in space, our blood would boil and we wouldn't last very long there in those conditions. Or in an extremely low temperature environment, or an extremely high temperature environment. Our bodies would just burn and disintegrate if the environmental temperature was too high. Even a rock depends on its environment to continue its existence. If you make it too hot, it melts like in a volcano and you end up with magma flowing. Add more energy and the atoms themselves break apart. They're not even stable above certain energies. The electrons get ripped away and you end up with a plasma. Increase the energy even more and the nucleus breaks apart and you get nuclear reactions and certain atoms will transmute into others. Increase the energy even more and even the protons and the neutrons aren't even stable. They'll break apart into their gluons and quarks. And at these super intense high energies, these particles just transform into each other. So all of this matter is totally dependent on its environment for maintaining its kind of integrity. Any object we have exists only because the environment around it allows it to maintain that integrity. If you raise the energy and temperature too much, it disassembles and loses its form. So this now takes us even deeper than interdependence to look at another way that things are dependent on other things. Which is that in addition to certain, say, forms of life being dependent on other forms of life, certain pieces of matter being dependent on other forms of matter, objects also depend more fundamentally on what the Buddhists call conceptual designation, our naming of them to be something. The Hindus say things are just name and form. And so to get a sense of what this means, let's consider a simple example like a chair. So you're all presumably sitting on a chair. For the sake of argument, let's imagine it's a wooden chair made completely of wood. And is easily disassembled by, say, taking out some screws or nuts and bolts or what have you. So we say normally that, oh, well, does a chair exist here? Yes, there's a chair there, it exists. But it exists in dependence upon its parts, of course. If you took away the legs, and you took away the seat, and you took away the armrests, and you took away the back, of course, you wouldn't have a chair anymore. But a little more subtle than that, if you didn't take away the parts, but you merely disassembled them, I don't know if you've ever put together something from IKEA, but you just get a big box of items, and let's say it's a chair. Well, you look at all these pieces on the floor, and is there a chair there? That's not a chair. You have to assemble it for the chair to exist, right? You have the parts that will make a chair, but you wouldn't say that's a chair if you're going to be precise. You'd say those are the pieces that you're going to use to put together the chair. So let's say you put together this chair. Okay, now you have this chair, you've assembled it, and you say, ah, there's a chair. Is there some like essence that was like created? Is there some new substance that somehow it's imbued with now that exists that wasn't there before? Or if you start to disassemble it, let's say you take one leg off, you take the other leg off. At what time does it stop being a chair? And in that moment that it stops being a chair, did some substance disappear? Did it die? Did the chair die when you disassembled it? It's not really a new material substance there, right? All the pieces are still there. So we go around saying, oh, the chair exists, the table exists, the walls exist, and all of this. But if you disassemble those things, you see, well, there was really no chair essence that was actually there that was destroyed by disassembling it. So in what sense did it really exist in the first place? When we say, oh, there's a chair, what do we really mean? Normally we think there's this real thing called a chair out there. But what's actually happening, if you look at this closely, is when these parts, when these forms assemble to create something that has the form and function that we conventionally agree is to be called a chair, then we designate that form to be a chair, and we say a chair exists. But this isn't something that's happened out there in the world. There wasn't some new substance created by virtue of that. It's our mental designation saying, oh, now this can be regarded as a chair. It functions as a chair. It has all the properties that we agree we can now call a chair. So it lacks this property of being something inherently in and of itself, kind of from its own side, as they say. And this is also sometimes called its emptiness of its own inherent existence. So, since the chair as chair in itself doesn't really exist as some substance, then we can't really destroy that supposed substance of chair. We can change the arrangement of its parts, but there's not a chair essence that's been destroyed or that dies. And when we put them together, we're not creating some new substance, some new essence that now exists there that didn't before. We're merely rearranging these parts into a form that we designate to be a chair. It satisfies our definition, and then we can say there's a chair. So there's not actually a birth of a chair out there or a death of a chair out there. And so this is something that is happening mentally, conceptually. That's why it's a conceptual designation. The Buddhist scholar Jeffrey Hopkins says, a consciousness conceiving inherent existence is destroyed by meditation on emptiness. But self-inherent existence has never existed and thus can never be and need not be destroyed. So it's this idea that there is some essential chair there. The idea of that is what the meditation on this dispels. So it's not like when we say something's empty, it's not like we're taking away something that was already there. It actually didn't exist. We're just changing our perception so that we're no longer under this illusion that there's a real chair out there. So when you first hear this about the chair, you might say, okay, I accept that for the chair. It's kind of odd, but all right. That makes sense. That's logical. But what about those parts? I mean, they're still there, right? So fine, there's no chair essence, but still there's wood there, right? And the wood exists objectively, right? Well, guess what? You can apply the same analysis to the wood, and you find what? Well, the wood is an arrangement of, say, sawdust in a certain form, like the leg of a chair is the arrangement of I guess there's cellulose fibers and things like that in there. And that's arranged in the form of, say, a cylinder. And we say, well, that's a chair leg. Well, just like the chair, it's just a form of those fibers that in a cylinder, and when it's in that form, it can function as a leg of a chair. And so we designate it, there's a chair leg. Well, there's not some essence there that is chair-leggedness that is somehow created apart from those cellulose fibers having a particular form that we name chair leg. Okay, so the chair leg is just a form. It doesn't really have its own essence that can be born and die. Well, what about those cellulose fibers? Well, cellulose fibers, what are they made up? A bunch of molecules, right? You arrange molecules in a certain way, you get a cellulose fiber. If you disassemble them, you aren't really creating or destroying anything. So the same analysis applies there. Well, what about the cells in there? Same analysis applies to the cells. What about the molecules that make up those cells? Same analysis applies there. How about the atoms? Don't the atoms exist? Well, an atom is just a certain arrangement of subatomic particles. And when you have a certain number of protons and neutrons and electrons, we call that element 12 or what have you. Rearrange them, it's a different atom. But we haven't created some new essence there. So all of these things don't have any inherently existing nature. They're all conceptually designated arrangements of form. So it's emptiness all the way down. Now our body, getting back to our own death, our bodies are, of course, arrangements of cells. And this particular arrangement of cells is a form, and there's not some magical essence there of body that is created or destroyed if these cells are taken apart and dissolved. into the environment. So when our body dies and it decomposes or is cremated, the atoms still exist, but they're no longer in that form. And so the form has changed, just like the chair, right? The form has changed, but no essence has been lost that wasn't there in the first place. So just like the chair, the body doesn't have some substantial existence and was never actually a thing that was born in itself, and so it isn't a thing that could die, just like the chair. It's conceptually designated. Um, so this is something that you can hear, but to really realize this, you need to revisit this and meditate on it, as many practitioners do over and over and over again. Can you actually find a body in your experience? So this brings us to, so far we've mostly been talking about kind of objective things, with atoms and molecules and things like that. But you can also take this more experientially. So our experience of our body isn't an experience of cells and molecules and things. It's an experience of bodily sensations, tastes and sights and sounds. And so we have these faculties of seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting, thinking. And our field of experience is, you might say, built of these parts. And we can, just like you can put parts of a chair together to make a chair, you can take parts of these sensations and things together and have an experience of a body. Oh, here I am. I can feel my arms and my legs, and this is what it feels like to have a body. All those sensations and things has nothing to do with atoms and molecules and all those ideas, right? This is our immediate experience. Now we take those parts and we put them all together, and we get this idea that, well, they keep coming together in this kind of same way. This feeling of legs and this feeling of a head and arms, and it keeps showing up in these patterns, and so we conceptually designate, oh, well, now there's a body here. And when we do that, we're conceptually designating a experiential body, just like we conceptually designate that there's a chair. We put together these parts. But can we find that extra essence of a body there in our experience? So to make this really concrete, I thought we'd just use a very clear example of this. Sometimes the body can be very amorphous. Parts of our body just disappear out of awareness and then show up, like the sensation of your right foot. Now you have a sensation of your right foot. You probably didn't before I said that, right? So these things kind of come and go. But let's just start with something simple like this cup. So you have a visual experience here. There's visual phenomena here. And you see these patterns, colors and stripes, and it's in this configuration, that the shape that matches our idea of what a cup should be. And so our mind has a label of this form, gives it a name, cup, because it satisfies that definition. Now if I move this around, the shape, like here you can see the handle on it, but now you can't see the handle. So those are two different visual forms. But we still have this idea that, oh, well, the cup is still there, even though the forms are changing. So you've got all these changing forms, but this idea, this conceptual designation that the cup is still there. But is there a cup like out there from its own side that exists, or is this just the mind saying, oh, now there's a cup there? There are these forms and they match my idea of what a cup should be, so I say in my mind, there's a cup, I name it, and then I make the mistake of thinking, oh, it's really out there. Well, is it? I mean, can you find it? What do you find if you look to your immediate experience? Do you ever find a three-dimensional experience of a cup? You can find these visual phenomena, and they change as I rotate this around, and they all satisfy this idea of what a cup should be. You can, I'm touching it, and I can feel the hardness, the stiffness, the shape, and that satisfies my idea of what a cup should be. If this totally smushed and turned into a blob, I'd say, oh, that wasn't a cup, that was just, I don't know what would do that, a piece of clay that wasn't fired yet. Wannabe cup. But the cup itself, where is that? It's not in, it's not something I can hear. It's not something I can feel. I have sensations, but I don't feel a cup. I just feel these sensations of hardness. So there are all these sensations, but the cup itself, this three-dimensional thing, isn't ever something that arises in experience. There's an idea that something exists out there as a cup, but that's an idea. It's not a three-dimensional object out there. It's an idea, an activity of the mind. So and another clue here is that we can be fooled by our sensory experiences, like with a mirage. We're driving along and we see some water on the road ahead. Well, we get further, we see, oh, that wasn't really water. I saw something, I conceptually designated it as water, but then it turns out that was wrong. So it didn't actually exist out there. It existed in here, projecting this idea out there onto just the visual phenomena. And so that shows us that it didn't exist out there. It actually is coming from our side, not from that side. So to help us learn this in our own experience, the Buddha taught, you should train yourself thus. In the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, there's only the heard. In the sensed, there's only the sensed. And in the cognized, there's only the cognized. So we have these direct experiences of all these sense fields, but we don't have this, there's nothing more than that. There's no cup out there in addition to all of that we ever experience. So the practice here is to see if you can find that cup, or to see if you can find that body. You think you have a body, try and find it. Where is it? You can find all these sensations arising and passing away. But do you ever find that body that we think we have? Or is that just a conceptual designation? So if we realize that these things don't really exist out there, then we can realize the futility of grasping onto them as if they did have this independent existence. The Tibetan Dujong Lingpa says, "At no time throughout this beginningless succession of lifetimes has there ever been an actual birth. There has merely been the appearance of birth. There has never been an actual death, only the transformation of apparent phenomena." So, what about these phenomena themselves? We have these sensations arising and passing away. What's the nature of their existence? Are they born and die? Well, let's take a look. Let's consider the appearances themselves. Like right now, since I'm talking, it's convenient if you consider the appearance of sound. So if you listen to my voice, these are sounds arising and passing away. You hear the sound, and then there's no sound. At least not the sound of my voice. Maybe you hear a rumbling in the background. So, do these sounds have a self existent reality, or are they also empty like the chair, like the cup? Do they have some existence apart from the awareness of them? Can there ever be an experience without an awareness of it? So, how could you tease those apart? Can you tease them apart? If you hear the sound, where's the distinction between that and the awareness of it? Or maybe what part of that appearance isn't awareness, isn't made of consciousness, as it were? Is there any part of it that isn't awareness? Maybe we're thinking it's something that's coming and something that's going. But that may be like the chair, thinking that the chair is really there. Is that maybe just a conceptual designation? Oh, there's a phenomena, it came and it went. We can look at this very, very carefully in our experience if our mind is very clear and still, and watch this and see what happens. Sri Atmananda says, "You say you see an object, but you actually see only form." These are the appearances. So you say you see a cup, but you actually only see visual phenomena. Form is nothing but seeing. So you see only seeing. But did you really see even seeing? No. Because seeing can never exist distinct and separate from you. By you here he means awareness. So you did not see at all. Therefore no object exists. And in the Lankavatara Sutra we read, "When it is recognized that there's nothing beyond what is seen of the mind itself, the discrimination between being and non-being ceases. And as there is then no external world as the object of perception, nothing remains but the solitude of reality." And we read this over and over in all the traditions. There's no real existent thing apart from God, apart from Brahman, apart from Allah. It's one without a second. And of course, if non-duality is the truth, then how could there be a distinction? So the upshot of all this is that ultimately there's no death because there's no birth because nothing exists apart from the one reality. So maybe this has shed a little bit of light on those sayings of the mystics I shared at the beginning, and maybe how you can get to understanding one from the ordinary experience of humans. Okay, good to see you all. Have a great Sunday. Till we see you again, peace to you all.